This is very exciting to see the evidence that we read about in the biblical text.
Well, what do we have here?
Tim, this is the lower socket stone for the gate of Ai that you've read about in Joshua 7 and 8, and you can feel how hard this is. This is what's called Mizah Yehudi limestone. It's the very hard stuff. You'd make the cornerstone out of a building for this.
Yeah, you can see, and there's some limestone that you can carve into easily, but this, how heavy is this?
No, it's very heavy. Now, I think that you and I can pick it up if you're up for it. You should be able to get a good grip there.
Okay.
You ready?
Yeah.
All right.
Oh yeah, that's just, what is that, 100 and some pounds?
Oh, that's more than 200 pounds.
Oh, really?
So this is not going anywhere.
Right.
You can see why it would make an ideal socket stone.
Yeah.
Now the other one above it, the upper socket stone, is not nearly as heavy, and you can see that.
Look at that. Yeah. Put your hand right through.
Right. So feel how smooth that is.
It actually made a hole all the way through, right?
That's right. And so this then would not have been able to been used after that. It would be in some sort of secondary usage.
Yeah. And so, explain this right here.
Okay, so the gate of Ai has 2 chambers on one side, 2 chambers on the other side. And so each one of those chambers has a door on it. So then we need socket stones, upper and lower, for each one. This was the first one that we found. This was the last one that we found right here.
Okay, excellent.
And you can see our artist did a nice job of sort of depicting what maybe it looked like in the day, even with the flags on it and so forth.
Yes, so tell me how it came about that you found this.
Well, it's fascinating. We actually have 6 lower socket stones and 6 upper socket stones that match them, and you can see how it works here. This is a recreation of the Gate of Ai as it would have looked, about a 2.5-acre fortress built in the Middle Bronze Age and then occupied through the end of the Late Bronze I period. So here's the door on the gate, and so this socket stone sits down here, and the upper one sits up here, and it pivots on it. And so you can see what happens over time. It's actually worn through on this one. You know, you can get a look at that.
Oh, look at that. Yeah, that made a hole actually right there.
Where it's worn through.
Yeah.
So Proverbs talks about a lazy man pivots on his bed like a door pivots on its stone. So this is a socket stone, and it's large.
And this is a significant location because the Bible speaks about the conquest and the cities that were destroyed, right?
That's right. It's very important to us because starting in the 1960s, after Joseph Calloway excavated at Tell, which is just about 1 kilometer from el-Maqatir, he believed that that was the Ai of Joshua's day, and after the excavation, he found no evidence of anyone living there at the time of the biblical conquest.
And that would have been adding to the fuel to the fire, right? That
was started in the 1950s, right? So Kenyon in the 50s has basically announced the same thing at Jericho. On the heels of that, you have Calloway announcing this at Ai. Tim, if you lose Jericho and you lose Ai, you've lost the conquest. And if you don't have a historical conquest, you don't have a historical Old Testament.
Yeah.
And you can see the problem. So this is very important to us because we get things specifically mentioned in the text. Joshua's story, Joshua 7 and 8, tell us about the Gate of Ai. It says that it was located on the north side of the city. Guess where the gate is at el-Maqatir?
It's on the north side.
It's not on the west, it's not on the south, it's not on the east, it's on the north. If it wasn't, then this wouldn't have been Ai. So when we started finding things like that, and then the actual socket stones near the gate, then of course this meant we had to investigate further.
So I have to believe that there was great celebration when you found the first socket stone.
Oh, I think that's safe to say that we blew the trumpet in Zion. Great rejoicing in the camps of the righteous when we found this. This was the first socket stone to be found. Ultimately, at the end of the dig, we were able to find the final socket stone. And you can see Dr. Wood and I here smiling really big with the final one. But it started with this guy right here.
Now, did anyone think that there was a city there before?
No. We know that there was a local tradition saying that this was Ai. The people back in the mid-1800s believed that that was the site of Ai. Once the modern era began and you got the idea of Ai being located at Tell, then that sort of began to fade. The explorers, like Edward Robinson, when they went there, they were on the top of the hill looking for the remains, and there was the church there, but if they would have just gone about 2 more minutes, they would have run right into the fortress of Ai.
My understanding is that Ai isn't located on a hill, right? It's located in a valley?
It's illogical, Tim.
Yeah.
You would expect it to be on the hill, on the high point,
Yeah.
because you would want to have defensibility, access to trade routes, and ideally water. But it's not. For some reason, in antiquity, they put it down in the saddle, and that's why a lot of the explorers missed it.
Did anyone have maybe a theory as to why it was sitting there?
No, in fact, when Albright and Callaway are discussing the possibilities, they said that there's no other possibility in the region. They have scoured every hill and nothing else exists. Well, they missed this because they were looking on the tops of the hills, not in the saddles. So we have to remember not everything is logical in antiquity any more than it's logical today.
How big of a city was it? When we think about the conquest, we think about Jericho, I don't think a lot of people, even myself, know how big these cities might have been.
Well, that's a good question. Jericho is about 9 acres inside the walled city. We know that Ai would have been smaller from reading the text, right? Smaller than Gibeon, smaller than Jericho. Our side is 2.5 acres in size, so it's really quite small, but it's heavily fortified, but small, which is what you would expect for Ai.
How many people could live in an area like that?
Okay, so at Jericho, at maybe 1,000 inside the walled settlement, so at Ai, a couple hundred at the most. Maybe 100 might be a better number, 100 to 150. In time of siege, maybe you can double that. But
So people from the countryside would come in and stay in the fortress.
it's a symbiotic relationship. You know, you've got people living out on the hills that are raising animals and growing crops, and so they need fortification, but you need the produce that they're creating.
So when they would cut a hole, they would chisel a hole into this?
Well, normally it would have a natural indentation of some kind that would begin that. If not, they could chisel it a little bit to get it started. The post over time begins to create, feel that, feel how smooth that is.
Yeah.
So it begins to create this socket type of effect.
Is that just a wooden post sitting in here, and it's just sort of over the years, just kind of
Over
like
and
sanding
over
it
and
away?
over. It's just creating that. Now, ultimately, when it goes all the way through on a big one like this, it's repurposed, and guess what the ancient people use it for? It becomes a toilet.
Oh, you're kidding.
Oh, no, I'm very serious. We see this in the city of David at the house of Ahiel, and also in the new renewed excavations at Lachish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they reused the gate sockets for toilets.
Once it's worn all the way through,
Yeah.
then it goes into secondary usage, and that's archaeology for you.
Yeah.
Secondary usage.
Yeah, well, you'd want it would be a lot of work to make a hole.
Well, that's right.
You know, in a stone. So, and this was an example. So this is actually an eye socket with a hole. So are you trying to tell me that this was a toilet at one time?
No, I think this was probably too small. They would use the lower ones that I know of for the sockets. So,
And this is an upper socket?
this is an upper socket. So
Okay.
picture this down on the ground, and then maybe 6 feet above that would be this socket with
Okay.
a post in between, and it pivoting on the post.
Yeah.
Now remember, we're talking about real people, real places, and real events. The Bible discusses the gate of Ai. It says that the king of Ai, in fact, they took his body after he was killed, and they threw him there into the gate and covered him with stones in the gate of Ai. So the question, Tim, is are we talking about real history, or are these fairy tales? The material culture seems to be indicating we're finding exactly what we would expect to find. It's matching. It's smaller than Jericho. The gate is on the north side of the city. In a minute, we're going to see that we have evidence of women living at Ai, as the biblical text says. So when we take the topography and the geography, there's a beautiful alignment with the biblical text.
And a lot of scholars have dismissed the biblical story because they would say there really wasn't a place like an Ai, right? Or
Right.
they were discounting that.
That's right. The Bible many times is guilty until proven innocent in certain circles. And so until we came along with the evidence, which we're just now publishing, I mean, in this year, 2019, our Volume 1 will come out, and then next year, 2020, Volume 2 will come out. So, I mean, we've done peer-reviewed journals, we've done media stuff, but it's just now in the next 24 months that the world is going to hear the whole argument of the Fortress of Ai.
Anything else before we move on?
Well, just to get the big picture of what this was like, it's a fortified site. You pass through the gateway, and then we have like commandant's quarters on part of it. We've got other towers and other sections. So don't think of it as a city. Think of this as a fortress of Ai. Probably the border fortress for the city-state of Jerusalem. It's right on the line between what will later become Benjamin and Ephraim territory, but at this point, it's the dividing line between the city-state of Jerusalem and the city-state of Shechem.
Well, Well, let's go look at something else.
All right. On this table, Tim, we have a number of artifacts that verify and corroborate the account that we read in Joshua 7 and 8. So let's kind of go through these. This is what's called a scarab. Now you see there are 3 scarabs here. These are Hyksos period scarabs. But this guy right here was voted the #1 find in Israel in the year 2013. Think about that.
Yeah, look at that.
Yeah, what's the big deal? He's a beetle on the back.
Yeah.
That's what the word scarabus means, is beetle. But you can see the iconography. You have a griffin. He has the head of a falcon and the body of a lion.
Okay, is that representing a particular time period?
It does, because this iconography is unique. Each pharaoh has his own iconography. So think about it. The falcon rules the sky, the lion rules the earth. So this is a depiction of Pharaoh ruling the heavens and the earth.
Okay.
And then behind him is the neter symbol. It's like a little flagpole symbol. And that's the symbol for God or Lord. Then to the far right, you have the Ankh. So these 3 symbols are the key. How do you read this when you're reading in pictures?
Well, if you're asking me, I have no idea. Yeah.
Well, let me tell you how you read it. Pharaoh is Lord of heaven and earth and is the source of all life. Now, back in the 18th dynasty, in the reign of Amenhotep II, which is what this iconography dates to, which is a likely candidate for the Pharaoh of the Exodus, then here we have this at the fortress of Ai, just above bedrock in a sealed archaeological locus. So this is gold as far as dating goes.
So that's telling you that this pharaoh was reigning at that time in history, and the city was still in existence.
It means that it was occupied after the time of Amenhotep. Okay, so it was clearly this was before the destruction of the fortress, because we have a destruction layer, and you can see this young lady smiling really big here because she knows she just did something really great, because she's getting more attention than she's ever had in her whole life.
And was she the one that...
In context. So sometimes we get these in the sifting, but she actually spotted it in context.
I have to say that it is so small that if you didn't look carefully, can you imagine, you would just dismiss it. It would just, because I've looked at the
Absolutely.
sifting, and there are so many pieces and so many, that's why this idea of water sifting.
Right. Think about it. The 3 scarabs that we excavated at el-Maqatir, all those years, 3 scarabs, because we didn't have any water. Now at Shiloh, in only 2 seasons, we've recovered 6 scarabs because we're wet sifting everything. 3 of those came from the wet sifting.
Yeah, those, to me, actually, that looks like, you know, if that was with a bunch of other rocks, you would never be able to distinguish that that's actually a rock and not or that it's a scarab, you know.
Tim, the reason it's so important is because we were arguing over the dating of the pottery. Is the pottery late Bronze Age? Like this is a late Bronze Age storage jar. This is a middle Bronze Age jar. And it takes an expert, a ceramic typologist, to be able to really date the fine points.
So these are 300 years or more apart from each other.
This is the foundational phase of the fortress. This is the terminal phase of the fortress. So they're separated by a couple hundred years in time. Were we dating our pottery correctly? So some had argued and said, oh, you guys are just trying to make the pottery fit your date. When we found this in a sealed context with that pottery right next to it, we were able to prove that what we were doing with dating the pottery was right all along.
So a sealed context, define what that means.
When we have a floor, for example, then we know whatever's underneath that floor surface is undisturbed. So it's sealed. A clean context is good, but a sealed context is even better.
All right. Now, what is this right here?
Okay,
it
look
looks
at
like
this.
a little tool.
It's a beautiful bronze.
Store.
You know, the same tools that you would have in your garage, many of them they had in theirs as well. It's very utilitarian, but this is an axe, and they would have used it for utilitarian purposes, chipping, chiseling, and so forth. And hold it, you can see the weight of it.
You know, it has more weight than you would think. You really feel that weight. You can actually get some momentum here.
Absolutely.
And it almost looks like it has like a little nail puller or something. I don't know what that is.
Well, they had to open their Coke bottles.
Yeah, I guess.
No, you're right. It's very utilitarian.
And the reason it's green is because bronze, when it's oxidized.
Sure.
And then
Sure.
you have some daggers here too.
So these are daggers, and you can have spears, daggers, points, and so forth. And when we find these things in a militaristic context, for example, with sling stones, you get daggers with sling stones, and these come from the Gate of Ai. So the Bible says there was a fortress there.
Yeah.
So where are they going to be slinging? At the gate. That's the vulnerable part of the city. So you may be dealing here, Tim, hold that, with things that Joshua and his men recorded in Joshua 7 and 8, threw at the Gate of Ai, and here you have them.
Yeah.
And there are many more. We just have 4 here as a representation.
Yeah. So let's say anyone in the ancient time would try to find as round a stone as they could, or chip them or whatever,
Right.
and get them. But if you were throwing something like this, if you got hit by this, it'd kill you.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, whoever hit you.
That's right. If you hit somebody with this, they're going down.
Now imagine if you had 100 or 200 people throwing a storm of these rocks, because you didn't wear armor.
Not in the Bronze Age, they didn't. And remember, they're using slings, and that means it can go 150 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And we have sources that tell us that they were accurate up to 500 meters, a slinger was. So when you, like you said, you've got hundreds of people unleashing this at 150 miles an hour, that is a major siege. So no wonder we found dozens of these in the gateway of Ai.
Yeah.
Now, in times of peace, sometimes I'm asked, you notice how that's kind of square, but it does fit really nicely into your hand.
Yeah.
Is that a pounder, like to be used in the kitchen, or is it a sling stone?
Okay, to touch this, yeah.
Sure. My answer is, depends on if it's peace or war.
Yeah.
I mean, you empty out your kitchen if you're at war,
Yeah.
and all the pounders become sling stones.
Yeah.
So we see evidence then of the conquest of Ai here.
Well, and the other thing is the Bible says that David had a sling and a rock,
That's right.
and that he actually had 5 stones. So, sometimes you think of like a small little stone, but if this story of the Bible of David, is
Right.
happened the way it says it's happened, then having a rock like this hit somebody in the head.
Well, just picture what this would do. This would crush your skull. I mean, if it hit him in the forehead, then he's completely incapacitated at this point. In the biblical text, remember, his armor bearer was out in front of him. So Goliath was vulnerable at that point. The armor bearer was out in front, and David ran at him and unleashed the stone.
Yeah, it was something he probably hadn't.
No, it just there was a window of opportunity that he seized.
There was an old joke, it said, what did Goliath say when he got hit by this stone? Do you remember that one?
No, I don't.
So nothing like that ever entered my head before.
That's a good one.
Okay, so what is this over here?
Okay, Tim, this is another important piece of evidence for the fortress at Ai, because the Bible says that there were women living at the fortress. Now, if it's a military fortress, that gives pause, because why would you have women living there? But the Bible specifically mentions that fact. Do we have evidence of women at the fortress of Ai at the time that the Bible says it was occupied? In this jar, we uncovered the remains of a neonate, a newborn baby, buried from the bottom. I'm going to pick it up so that you can see it better.
Okay, look at that, yeah.
See how they cut the bottom out of this jar. And we know that it's a late Bronze Age jar you see the way that the rim everts, it goes out?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's typical of that time period. Plus the size of the inclusions and the general style, we can date this to the late Bronze Age.
So why would they cut a hole in the bottom?
Okay, so to fit the baby's body through.
Okay.
So the baby's body won't fit through the top.
Yeah.
So they cut the hole in the bottom, and then the baby is inserted here, probably wrapped in some way. And near them, we find dipper juglets. And these are part of their cultic practice. We really don't understand Canaanite religion very well yet. We're still struggling to understand that. But I think it had something to do with some sort of ritual pouring of water or oil or preparation of the body for the next life as they understood it. But it really sort of brings out the emotions, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Because
I feel that it's to know that actually that a small child was buried in a vase like
and
this.
the mother's feelings of having lost her baby, and the idea of life and death and how tenuous it is. This really reminds us of that.
When you look at this, living in the ancient world was a very life and death struggle, wasn't it? I mean, you've got sling stones, you've got daggers. You've got
yeah.
baby tombs.
That's right. I mean, these are issues of life and death. Real people dealing with real situations like we deal with today. But I think, Tim, the big point is verisimilitude. Does the material culture match what we would expect it to be when we read the biblical text? And the answer is yes.
So what you're finding is that at I, you wanted to know, was there a fortress in this area?
Right.
So that's when you found the sockets. And that started to tell you that you had found the city, because no one else had found the city before,
Well,
right?
that's right. This was in 1994, the initial investigation. And not only did we find the sockets, but also one of the chambers survived. So there were, remember, 2 chambers on one side, 2 on the other. 3 of them had been scavenged by later builders, but one was left intact because they reused it as a wine press in a later time period.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it told you that the Bible said that there was actually women and men living at this fortress, and that's what this is showing us here.
Which is a curious fact, because some had raised the point, why would there be women living in a military fortress?
Yeah.
But we don't know why, but there were, because we have a newborn, a neonate with the bones buried here. Our anthropologist, Marina Fairman at Hebrew University, reassembled them so that we could, see the baby. So it was really quite moving to see this baby after thousands of years.
Yeah.